Ben Carter wiped the thick grease from his hands with an old rag that had seen better days. His repair shop on New Terra smelled like engine oil and welding fumes, a scent he'd grown to love over the years. It was past midnight, and he was the last person still working in this section of the colony. The frontier settlement had gone quiet hours ago, with only the steady hum of the power generators breaking the silence. He grabbed his jacket from the hook near the door and switched off the main lights. Tomorrow was going to be another long day. 3 mining ships needed repairs, and the colony's water filtration system was making that grinding noise again. Ben made a mental note to check it first thing in the morning. As he walked toward his storage bay to grab some spare parts for tomorrow's work, something stopped him in his tracks. A sound. Low and rumbling like distant thunder, but with a wet, painful quality that made his skin crawl. It was coming from inside the bay. Ben's first thought was that one of the mining crews had left an injured animal in there as some kind of stupid prank. It wouldn't be the first time. But when he opened the bay doors and stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. Collapsed behind a stack of fuel cells, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting, was a creature that looked like it had stepped out of Earth's ancient history. It resembled a leopard, the kind Ben had only seen in old nature videos from back home. But this was no Earth animal. It was massive, easily twice the size of any big cat he'd ever heard of. Its fur was pure white, so pale it almost seemed to glow in the darkness. Strange bioluminescent spots covered its body, pulsing weakly like dying stars. And its eyes, those golden eyes that locked onto Ben the moment he entered, held an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. The creature tried to move when it saw him, but collapsed with a sound that was half growl, half whimper. That's when Ben saw the leg. The creature's left hind leg was twisted at an angle that made Ben's stomach turn. Bone fragments pressed against the skin, and dark blood matted the white fur around the wound. Ben's neural implant buzzed to life, flashing a warning directly into his vision. The text appeared in angry red letters. Species identified Valari. Classification, apex predator. Threat level, extreme. Recommended action, avoid all contact. Alert colony security immediately. Ben stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding. Everything he'd heard about the Valari flooded his mind. They were solitary hunters that roamed the deep wilderness beyond the colony's safe zones. They'd killed at least 3 prospectors who'd wandered too far from the settlement. The colony administrator had posted warnings about them. Stay away. Don't approach. Don't make eye contact. But as Ben looked at this creature, all he saw was a living being in terrible pain. The Valari's breathing was shallow and rapid. Its bioluminescent spots were flickering, barely holding their glow. Blood pooled beneath it on the concrete floor. This wasn't a monster. This was just another broken thing that needed fixing. Ben had been a mechanic his entire adult life. 28 years of fixing broken machines, patching up damaged ships, and keeping things running when they wanted to fall apart. His father had been a mechanic. His grandfather too. The Carter family had a saying, if it's broken you fix it. You don't walk away. You don't give up. He took a slow breath and made his decision. Moving carefully, keeping his movements smooth and predictable, Ben walked back to his workbench. He grabbed his medical kit, the one required for all frontier workers. Then he picked up his welding torch and a box of metal scraps. If he was going to do this, he'd need to improvise. The Valari watched him approach with those golden eyes. Ben could see the muscles in its body tensing, ready to strike if he came too close. But there was something else in those eyes too. Not just pain and fear. There was a strange awareness, like the creature was trying to decide if Ben was a threat or something else entirely. Ben knelt down about 6 feet away, keeping his movements slow. He opened the medical kit and laid out what he had. Painkillers designed for humans but strong enough to maybe help, antiseptic spray, bandages, and a bone-setting manual that popped up on his neural display. Okay, Ghost, Ben said softly, not sure why he chose that name. Maybe it was the pale fur, or maybe it was because this creature seemed like something from another world. I'm going to help you, but you need to let me get close. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But that leg needs fixing, and I'm pretty good at fixing things. The Valari tilted its head slightly as if considering his words. Ben knew the creature couldn't understand English, but tone mattered. He'd learned that working with the half-wild dogs that roamed the colony, tone and intention meant everything. He slowly scooted closer, watching for any sign of aggression. The Valari growled softly but didn't lunge. Closer. Another foot. The creature's breathing quickened, but it held still. Finally, Ben was close enough to touch. With trembling hands, Ben reached out and gently touched the Valari's shoulder. The fur was incredibly soft, almost like silk. The creature flinched but didn't pull away. Ben could feel the rapid heartbeat beneath the fur, matching the rhythm of his own racing pulse. "That's it," Ben whispered. "I've got you now. Let's fix that leg." He injected the painkillers first, hoping they'd work on alien biology. The Valari's pupils dilated and some of the tension left its body. Then Ben began the careful, grueling work of setting the broken bone. He used his engineering knowledge, treating the leg like a damaged mechanical joint that needed realignment. The titanium struts from his spare parts box became a custom brace, welded and shaped to fit the Valari's anatomy. 4 hours passed. Ben's back ached from kneeling on the concrete. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His hands cramped from the delicate work. But slowly, carefully he rebuilt what was broken. Through it all, the creature Ben called Ghost never once tried to bite him or scratch him. She just watched with those intelligent golden eyes, occasionally making soft sounds that almost seemed like encouragement. When Ben finally tightened the last bolt on the brace and wrapped the leg in protective padding, he sat back, exhausted. His hands were covered in blood, oil, and his own sweat. His workshop clothes were ruined. But the leg was set. The bleeding had stopped. Ghost's breathing had become steady and deep. Then something happened that Ben would remember for the rest of his life. Ghost made a sound he'd never heard before, a deep, rumbling purr that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. The sound was so powerful it vibrated through the floor, through Ben's bones, filling the storage bay with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a sound of trust, of gratitude, of something Ben couldn't quite name but understood in his soul. Ghost closed her golden eyes and settled into sleep, her body finally relaxing. Ben was too exhausted to walk back to his quarters. He grabbed an old blanket from his emergency supplies, spread it on the floor next to Ghost, and lay down beside the massive creature. Within seconds he was asleep, the sound of Ghost's purring filling his dreams. 3 months went by in a blur. Ben had expected Ghost to leave as soon as her leg healed enough to walk. That's what wild animals did, right? They got better and returned to their natural habitat. But Ghost didn't seem to get that memo. Every single morning when Ben unlocked his repair shop at 6 o'clock, Ghost would be there waiting for him. Sometimes she'd be curled up by the door, those bioluminescent spots glowing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. Other times she'd be prowling around the perimeter, checking the area like a security guard on patrol. The moment she saw Ben, her spots would pulse brighter, and she'd make that rumbling sound deep in her throat that he'd come to recognize as her version of saying hello. The leg was healing remarkably fast. Within the first month, Ghost was putting weight on it. By the second month, she was walking without a limp. By the third month, Ben watched her leap onto a stack of cargo containers 8 feet high, and he knew she was back to full strength. Yet she stayed. Ghost started exploring every corner of the workshop. She'd sniff at engine parts, bat at hanging tools with her massive paws, and investigate every new piece of equipment Ben brought in. Her bioluminescent spots grew brighter each day, pulsing in patterns that Ben swore looked different depending on her mood. When she was content, they glowed steady and blue. When she was curious, they flickered green and yellow. When she was playful, which happened more often than Ben expected, they danced with rapid purple flashes. The whole colony knew about Ben's unusual roommate by the end of the first week. People would walk past his shop just to catch a glimpse of the massive white creature lounging in the sun by the bay doors. Some thought Ben was crazy. Others thought he was lucky to still be alive. A few brave souls even stopped by to take pictures, though Ghost usually disappeared into the back of the shop when strangers got too close. One Thursday afternoon, Lisa Moore showed up at the shop. She was the colony administrator, a practical woman in her 50s who'd been on New Terra since the first settlement ships landed. She had a worried expression on her face that Ben recognized immediately. It was her, "We need to talk about the rules" face. Ben was under a mining hauler replacing a blown hydraulic line when he heard her boots on the concrete floor. Ghost, who'd been napping in a patch of sunlight, opened one golden eye to watch the visitor. "Ben, we need to discuss your situation here," Lisa said, her voice carrying that official tone she used at colony meetings. Ben rolled out from under the hauler, wiping oil from his forearms. "If this is about the Valari, her name's Ghost and she's not causing any trouble." Lisa glanced at Ghost, who was now watching both of them with clear interest. "Ben, people are talking. You've got a Valari living in your shop." "A Valari? Do you understand what that means? These creatures are solitary hunters. They're territorial. They're dangerous. They don't bond with anyone, especially not humans. Every xenobiology report we have says they avoid all contact with other intelligent species." Ben grabbed a wrench and walked back to the hauler, tightening a bolt that didn't really need tightening. Well, I guess nobody told Ghost that. It was true. Ghost had become something Ben never expected. She'd started helping him in small ways that seemed impossible for a wild animal. If Ben needed a specific wrench and left it across the shop, Ghost would grab it in her mouth and bring it to him. She seemed to understand which tool he needed just by watching what he was working on. When he dropped screws, she'd bat them back toward him with her paw. At night, when Ben stayed late sketching designs for new repairs or improvements, Ghost would rest her massive head on the edge of his workbench, her warm breath fogging up his tablet screen. Her constant purring became like background music to his work. But the strangest part started about 2 months into their friendship. Ben arrived at the shop one morning to find Ghost waiting for him as usual, but this time she had something in her mouth. She dropped it at his feet with a proud look in her golden eyes. It was a cluster of energy crystals, the kind that miners spent weeks searching for in the deep caves. Each crystal was worth about 500 credits. Ghost had brought him at least 3,000 credits worth of crystals like they were just pretty rocks she'd found. "Where did you get these?" Ben asked, knowing Ghost couldn't answer. She just sat down, her tail swishing back and forth, clearly pleased with herself. The gifts kept coming. Rare metals that Ben had never seen in any catalog. Strange plants that glowed in the dark. Once, Ghost dragged in what looked like a piece of machinery, covered in dirt and oxidation. When Ben cleaned it up and showed it to the colony's research team, they nearly lost their minds. It was technology from an ancient civilization that had disappeared 2,000 years ago. The scientists wanted to know where Ghost found it, but she'd just tilt her head and purr, keeping her secrets. Lisa visited a few more times over the months, each time a little less worried and a little more amazed. "You've made a friend," she said quietly one evening, watching through the window as Ghost and Ben worked together on a broken water pump. "The xenobiologists from Earth are asking permission to come study this. They say what you've done is impossible. Valari don't do this. They don't bond. They don't cooperate. They don't bring gifts." Ben scratched Ghost behind her ear, right in that spot that made her lean her entire weight against him. She was purring so loud the tools on his workbench were rattling. Maybe they just never had a reason to before. For years passed like that. Ghost became as much a part of Ben's life as his tools and his work. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes disappearing into the wilderness for days at a time before returning with more mysterious gifts or just wanting to spend time in the shop. Ben learned her moods, her signals, her preferences. She liked it when he talked to her while he worked. She hated the sound of the plasma cutter. She loved fish from the colony's aquaculture center. Then one day Ghost didn't come back. Ben waited a week then too. He told himself this was natural. She was a wild creature after all. She'd probably found her own kind, maybe started a family of her own out there in the unexplored territories. It was good that she'd moved on with her life. But the shop felt empty without her. The silence was too quiet. Ben caught himself leaving space for her by his workbench, expecting to see her white fur in his peripheral vision. He missed the weight of her head on his shoulder when he was tired. He missed the glow of her spots lighting up the dark corners of the shop. He'd saved her life, and she'd made his life better in ways he never expected. Now she was gone, and Ben had to accept that their time together had run its course. That's what he told himself anyway as the lonely months stretched on. He had no idea that Ghost would return when he needed her most. 5 years had passed since Ghost disappeared. Ben was 42 now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. He'd settled into a quiet routine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The shop stayed busy. New Terra had grown from 3,000 settlers to almost 5,000. More people meant more broken equipment, which meant Ben never ran out of work. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Ben was having coffee in the colony square, chatting with Pete Donovan, one of the mining crew supervisors, when someone screamed and pointed at the sky. Ben looked up and his coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the ground. The sky was turning dark. Not with clouds or a storm but with ships. Massive, angular warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their black hulls blocking out the morning sun. Ben had never seen anything like them. They looked like weapons themselves, all sharp edges and brutal efficiency. Every surface bristled with gun emplacements and missile pods. More and more ships appeared until the entire sky was filled with them. Ben stopped counting at 30. There had to be at least 50 vessels up there, maybe more. Each one was big enough to carry thousands of soldiers. The colony's emergency sirens started wailing. People poured into the square from every direction, all of them staring up at the fleet with the same expression of shock and terror. Parents grabbed their children. Elderly colonists clutched each other. Ben saw fear on every face around him, the kind of raw, primal fear that came from knowing you were completely helpless. Then the message came. It blasted from every speaker in the colony, from every personal communicator, from every neural implant. The voice was cold, mechanical, translated into every language simultaneously. Attention residents of New Terra. This world now belongs to the Kreshtar Empire. You have 24 hours to gather in your central square for processing and transport. You will be assigned work duties within the Empire. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will result in total annihilation of your settlement and all inhabitants. This is your only warning. Comply or die. The message repeated 3 times, each repetition driving home the terrible reality. New Terra was being invaded and there was nothing they could do about it. Panic hit the crowd like a physical wave. People started shouting, crying, running in different directions. Ben stood frozen, his engineer's mind trying to process what was happening. The Kreshtar Empire. He'd heard stories about them, whispered warnings from traders who'd seen the aftermath of their conquests. They were slavers. They traveled from system to system, taking over colonies that couldn't defend themselves, shipping the people off to work camps and mining operations across their empire. Lisa Moore climbed onto the fountain in the center of the square, trying to restore order. Everyone, please calm down. We need to think clearly. But there was nothing to think about. New Terra had no military. No weapons beyond mining equipment and hunting rifles. No defenses. They were farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors, families trying to build a peaceful life out here on the frontier. The nearest Earth Defense Force base was 3 weeks away, even at maximum faster-than-light speed. By the time help arrived, everyone on New Terra would be gone, shipped off to some nightmare work camp light years away. Ben's paralysis broke. He couldn't save everyone, but maybe he could save some. He pushed through the panicking crowd and ran toward his shop, his boots pounding on the pavement. His mind was already racing through possibilities. The colony had 12 civilian shuttles, designed for short-range transport between the surface and orbital stations. They had no weapons, minimal shields, engines built for efficiency rather than speed. But maybe, just maybe, Ben could modify them. Add armor plating. Rig the mining lasers to work as defensive weapons. Create enough of a distraction that some families could escape into deep space. It was a desperate plan. It probably wouldn't work. But doing something was better than standing around waiting to be enslaved. Ben burst into his shop and immediately started pulling equipment from storage. Welding torches, metal plating, power cores, anything he could use. Other colonists started arriving, people who'd had the same idea. Together they worked through the afternoon and into the evening, turning civilian shuttles into something that might survive long enough to get away from New Terra. Tommy Rivera, a young mechanic who'd apprenticed under Ben, was welding armor plates onto a shuttle hull. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the torch steady. "This isn't going to work, is it?" he asked quietly. Ben didn't answer. They both knew the truth. By midnight, Ben was alone in his shop. The others had gone home to spend what might be their last hours with their families. Ben had no family. Just his work. He'd managed to retrofit 4 shuttles. Maybe they could carry 200 people to safety. 200 out of 5,000. He collapsed against his workbench, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and fear. His hands were burned from the welding torch. His back ached from hours of crawling under shuttle hulls. But none of that mattered. He'd failed. In 23 hours, everyone he knew would be rounded up and shipped off to slavery, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Ben buried his face in his hands, fighting back tears he hadn't cried in years. That's when he heard it. A sound he'd never forgotten even after 5 years. A deep, rumbling purr that made his workbench vibrate. Ben's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway of his shop, her white fur almost glowing in the darkness, was Ghost. She looked exactly as he remembered. Those golden eyes. Those bioluminescent spots, now pulsing with bright blue light. She was older, maybe a bit larger, but unmistakably her. Ghost. Ben whispered, not quite believing his eyes. Ghost walked into the shop, her movements graceful and deliberate. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, Ben saw more shapes moving in the darkness. Eyes glowing in the night. Dozens of them. No, hundreds of them. The entire street outside his shop was filled with Velari, their white fur creating a sea of pale shapes in the shadows. Ghost walked right up to Ben and pressed her massive head against his chest just like she used to do years ago. The warmth of her, the rumbling purr, the familiar weight, it all came flooding back. Then something happened that made Ben's heart stop. His neural implant activated, receiving a signal. Ghost's bioluminescent spots were pulsing in complex patterns, and somehow, impossibly, they were forming words in his mind. "You saved me when I was broken. The translation read. Now we save you. Ben sent out an emergency signal to Lisa Moore the moment Ghost's message appeared in his neural implant. Within 10 minutes, Lisa came running into the shop, still pulling on her jacket. Behind her came the rest of the colony leadership. Mayor Jack Thompson, Chief Engineer Rita Hayes, and Dr. Neil Cooper, the head of the research facility. They all stopped dead in their tracks when they saw what was waiting inside. The shop was filled with Volari. Dozens of them, their white fur almost glowing in the overhead lights, their golden eyes tracking every movement the humans made. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rita actually took a step backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the door. Ben, what in God's name is happening here? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben gestured toward Ghost, who sat calmly beside his workbench. She can talk. Well, not talk exactly, but communicate. Watch. Ghost's bioluminescent spots began pulsing in intricate patterns, like living light shows dancing across her white fur. The translation software in everyone's neural implants activated, converting those light patterns into words they could understand. We are Volari, the translation began, and everyone in the room tensed. What you know of us is only what we allowed you to see. But there is much you do not know about our kind. Jack Thompson, a gruff man in his 60s who'd helped found the colony 20 years ago, found his voice. You're saying you can speak? All this time you've been able to communicate and you never did. Ghost's spots shifted to a darker blue, almost sad. We chose silence. 10,000 years ago we were not as you see us now. We ruled over 100 worlds across this sector of space. We were warriors, conquerors. We took what we wanted. We crushed anyone who stood against us. Our fleets were feared across the galaxy. The humans exchanged shocked glances. Dr. Cooper, who'd spent years studying the local wildlife, looked like his entire understanding of the universe had just been turned upside down. Ghost continued, her light patterns flowing like poetry. We were strong, but we were also cruel. We told ourselves that strength gave us the right to rule. That power meant we could do whatever we wished. Then one day we conquered a world of peaceful beings. They had no weapons, no armies. They grew food and created art and raised their children. We took everything from them. The shop had gone completely silent except for Ghost's purring, which provided a low background rumble to her words. After that conquest, our greatest leader looked at what we had become and saw only shame. We had turned our strength into tyranny. We had forgotten that true honor means protecting the weak, not exploiting them. So we made a choice. We withdrew from the galaxy. We destroyed our war fleets. We vowed never to interfere in the affairs of other species again. For 10,000 years we have kept that vow. Rita leaned against the wall, trying to process this revelation. But you're here now. You're breaking that vow. A larger Volari stepped forward from the back of the group. He was enormous, easily half again as large as Ghost, with scars crossing his white fur in dozens of places. Old battle wounds, Ben realized. This was a creature who'd seen serious combat. Ghost's patterns flickered. This is Talon, leader of our pride. He speaks for all Volari on this world. Talon's bioluminescent patterns were different from Ghost's. More precise, almost military in their sharpness. Ben Carter broke our vow for us, Talon's translation appeared. When Ghost came to him, broken and dying, he did not see a dangerous predator. He did not see something to fear or exploit. He saw a living being in pain and he helped her. He asked for nothing in return. Expected nothing. He simply could not walk away from suffering. Ben felt everyone's eyes on him. He shifted uncomfortably, not used to being the center of attention. Talon continued, this human showed us something we thought the galaxy had forgotten. Compassion without expectation of reward. Kindness given freely to a creature that could offer him nothing but danger. This is the honor we once valued. The honor we lost and have been seeking for 10,000 years. Lisa stepped forward, her practical mind cutting through the emotion. That's a beautiful sentiment, but we have about 23 hours before the Kreshtar turn this colony into a work camp. Can you help us or not? Talon's golden eyes fixed on her, and for a moment, Ben saw the ancient warrior that this creature truly was. The Kreshtar Empire. Yes, we know them well. 40 years ago they came to our homeworld. They brought 300 warships, the largest invasion fleet they had ever assembled. They believed we were simple animals, easy prey for their conquest. What happened? Jack asked. Talon's patterns flickered with something that might have been amusement. 7 of their ships escaped. The rest became scrap metal falling through our atmosphere. Dr. Cooper's eyes widened. You destroyed nearly 300 military vessels? We were holding back, Talon replied simply. We did not wish to completely annihilate them. Even slavers deserve a chance to flee and learn from their mistakes. The Kreshtar never returned to our space. Lisa's expression shifted from shock to something like hope. So you can fight them. You can protect us. We can, Talon confirmed. But we need your help. Our vessels are powerful, but they are biological, grown from our own genetic material. They have no shields against modern energy weapons. No electronic warfare capabilities. No targeting computers. We have stayed away from galactic technology for so long that we have forgotten how to merge the biological with the mechanical. Ben's mind was already racing ahead. Living ships. You're talking about actual living ships. Organic vessels. Yes, Ghost's patterns pulsed. But they need what you can provide. Your weapons. Your shields. Your technology. Combined with our vessels, we could create something the Kreshtar have never encountered. Lisa turned to Ben. Can you do it? Can you integrate our technology with biological systems? Ben looked at the Valari gathered in his shop. He thought about the terrified families outside. He thought about Ghost, who'd come back after 5 years because he'd shown her one act of kindness. His hands were already itching to get started. If they're biological, they'll have neural systems, circulatory systems, something I can interface with. I can adapt shield generators to work with organic power sources. Mount weapons along their natural structures. Create hybrid targeting systems that respond to both electronic and biological signals. He looked at Talon. But I need to see these ships. And I need every engineer, mechanic, and technician in this colony working with me. Talon's patterns shifted to bright, fierce gold. How much time do you need? Ben checked his chronometer. 18 hours until the Kreshtar deadline. It was impossible. It was insane. But Ben had built a career out of fixing impossible things. He grinned, though his heart was pounding with fear and adrenaline. 18 hours isn't much, but it'll have to be enough. Let's get started. Talon led Ben and a group of engineers about 5 miles outside the colony to a hidden valley. What Ben saw there made him stop in his tracks, his mouth hanging open. The Valari ships weren't ships in any traditional sense. They were alive. Massive creatures that looked like a cross between serpents and whales, each one easily 300 feet long. Their skin was translucent, like looking through frosted glass, and Ben could see organs pulsing beneath the surface. Glowing fluids moved through what looked like veins. The creatures breathed, their sides expanding and contracting in slow, rhythmic movements. "Oh my God," Rita whispered beside him. "They're beautiful. Beautiful and terrifying." Ben walked up to the nearest one, reaching out to touch its surface. The skin was warm and slightly rough, like touching a living thing rather than cold metal. The ship responded to his touch, its bioluminescent patterns rippling outward from where his hand made contact. "How do they fly?" Ben asked, his engineer's mind struggling to understand. Talon's patterns explained. "They fold space around themselves. They are born with this ability. They can regenerate damage to their bodies. They move faster than anything made of metal and circuits. But they have no defense against energy weapons. No way to strike back at enemies from a distance. This is why we need you." Ben looked at the 300 living ships spread across the valley. 17 hours to turn them into warships. It was impossible. But he had to try. He turned to the 50 engineers and mechanics who'd volunteered to help. Tommy Rivera was there despite his fear. Rita Hayes. Old Frank Wilson, who'd been fixing things since before Ben was born. Even Dr. Cooper had joined them, saying his medical knowledge might help with biological systems. "All right, listen up," Ben said, his voice carrying across the group. "These aren't machines. They're living beings. We're going to be doing surgery, not repairs. Every cut we make, they'll feel. Every modification we install, it'll become part of them. So we work carefully, we work respectfully, and we work fast. Understood?" Everyone nodded, though Ben could see the fear in their eyes. They were all scared. So was he. The next 17 hours became a blur of frantic work. Ben divided the teams up, assigning groups to different ships. The Valari had to sedate their vessels, keeping them calm while humans cut into them with surgical precision. Ben worked on the lead ship, the one Ghost would pilot. He started by mapping out the creature's neural system, finding the main nerve clusters that ran along its spine. Those would be the connection points for the targeting computers. Then he identified the circulatory system, the glowing fluids that powered the creature. Shield generators could tap into that, using biological energy instead of conventional power cells. The hardest part was mounting the weapons. Ben had to attach plasma cannons along the ship's spine without damaging its ability to move. He used medical-grade clamps and neural interfaces, creating a direct link between the weapons and the ship's nervous system. The ship would control the weapons like they were part of its own body. Ghost stayed beside Ben the entire time, her presence calming the massive creature whenever it stirred from the sedation. She'd purr softly, and the ship would settle down, trusting that what was happening was necessary. At one point, around hour 12, Ben's hands were shaking so badly from exhaustion that he dropped a neural connector. Ghost caught it before it hit the ground, holding it gently in her mouth and placing it back in Ben's hand. Their eyes met, and Ben saw something there that gave him the strength to keep going. Trust, faith, friendship. By the time the sun rose on what might be the colony's last day, all 300 ships had been modified. Hybrid vessels, part biology and part technology. Ben had no idea if they'd actually work. There'd been no time for testing, no time for trial runs. They'd either succeed or die trying. The Kreshtar deadline came at noon. Right on schedule, the enemy fleet began descending from orbit. 50 massive warships, their weapons charging, expecting to face helpless colonists. Instead, they found 300 Valari bioships rising to meet them. Ben watched from the ground, his heart in his throat. Every colonist in New Terra stood in the streets, looking up at the sky where their fate would be decided. Children clung to their parents. Elderly colonists held hands. Everyone was silent, barely breathing. The Valari ships moved like nothing Ben had ever seen. They didn't fly so much as swim through space, weaving and dodging with impossible grace. The Kreshtar opened fire first, massive energy beams that would have vaporized any normal ship. But the shields held. Ben's shields, powered by biological energy, absorbed the blasts. The ship's translucent skin glowed bright as the shields deflected the attacks. Then the Valari returned fire. The plasma cannons Ben had mounted lit up the sky. But it wasn't just the weapons. The ships themselves were fighting, using their natural abilities enhanced by human technology. They folded space, appearing behind Kreshtar vessels and tearing into them with teeth and claws that Ben had integrated with cutting lasers. Ghost ship led the assault. Ben recognized it by the specific modifications he'd made. She moved through the Kreshtar fleet like a predator hunting prey, graceful and deadly. Her ship dove toward the command vessel, the largest of the Kreshtar warships. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Ghost ship opened its jaws, actual biological jaws that Ben had reinforced with titanium and lined with plasma cutters, and bit down on the command ship's hull. Metal screamed as it tore like paper. The command vessel tried to shake her off, but Ghost held on, her ship's regenerating hide absorbing their defensive fire while she ripped the enemy vessel apart from the inside. The battle lasted 42 minutes. By the time it was over, 40 Kreshtar ships had been destroyed. The remaining 10 fled, jumping to faster-than-light travel in a desperate retreat. Not a single Valari ship was lost. A few were damaged, but Ben watched in amazement as their wounds literally healed, the organic tissue knitting back together within minutes. The sky cleared. The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone started cheering, and soon the entire colony was shouting, crying, hugging each other in relief and joy. Ben just stood there, watching as Ghost ship landed gracefully in the valley. She emerged, walking toward him with that familiar grace. When she reached him, she pressed her head against his chest, purring loud enough to shake his ribs. Ben wrapped his arms around her, tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." Through his neural implant, Ghost's message came through, warm and content. "No. You did it. You saved me. Then you saved all of us. This is what humans do."